Healing from the abandonment wound. And in this video, I'm going to share with you my own personal story of my own abandonment wound. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have some more guidance and steps how you can begin to start healing from your own abandonment wound. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. For those that are new, my name is Christina and I help empower people on their spiritual and healing journey so they can have a more fulfilling, purposeful driven life and know that you have the key to your own true divine potential. Don't forget to do all of the wonderful things like hitting the subscribe button and the bell notification so then you're notified of when I post a video. So with that bit out of the way, let's dive straight in. So we are designed by nature for connection, for love, for close relationships. Babies are born and will thrive and develop better with those that have received love, received that touch. And so this means when we don't receive that love, when we are disconnected from that love, maybe that's because of emotional abandonment or actual physical abandonment, we form the abandonment wound. And when we were younger, what children do, because they haven't developed that strong sense of self, they're in those early stages of their brain developing, what happens is they don't see the outside part of them as separate. They see that everything that is going on in their external environment as part of who they are. So what happens is often if they experience something traumatic, they think that is part of who they are and it forms their sense of self. So this means when a child physically feels abandoned or they feel emotional abandoned, they don't receive that love, that connection, that physical touch, then they internalize that as there's something wrong with them. They see that as a story that they make up about that experience, and then what happens, they hold on to that story and that becomes their core belief about themselves. So this means when a child like yourself or like myself when I was younger, when we went through an experience that made us feel like we were being abandoned, then we internalize that and think, well, there must be something wrong with me because my parent does not want me. And the fact is, it was never your fault. And we have to start understanding this, that our parents had their own shit to deal with. They had their own trauma to deal with. And because they weren't able to come from a place of consciousness, conscious awareness, they passed down their own shit, their own traumas onto us when we were children. And if you want to know if you have an abandonment wound, I have a free inner child wound quiz that will determine what your dominant inner child wound is. It's really quick and simple. You'll be sent a free personalized report about your abandonment wound and some steps you can begin to take to heal your inner child wound. So let me know in the comments below if any of these sound familiar to you, what you might have experienced in childhood that could have formed your abandonment wound. So the big and obvious one is divorce, separation, and this is usually the father abandonment wound. The father wound is usually the big abandonment wound because the father often sometimes doesn't even want to be part of the child's life. And so that means they are not physically present. This is a physical abandonment. Or it could be, unfortunately, this happens often, but not from a place of abuse, a place of any unwanted trauma. It happens when maybe your child is staying over at relatives or being dropped off at school, and all these places where the child has to be separated from the parent. And this can even happen in birth when a baby isn't born naturally, like cesarean. This can create that abandonment because of the separation, the forcefulness of the separation. If it's happened in a forceful way and the child gets very distressed, this means the child could internalize that as like, why is mummy or daddy leaving me? There must be something wrong with me. And then that holds on to that belief and even into adult life. But sometimes this cannot be helped. Sometimes children have to go to school if that's the route you go down. Sometimes children have to be with other caregivers. And especially in this 3D reality matrix that we live in, it's designed to create that separation in the family unit. And so what happens is then we continue to get traumatized from the abandonment wound. So that is one of the ways. It can also just happen if your parent threatened to constantly leave you. Is in, for example, you didn't listen and they said, well, I'm going without you. Bye-bye, Timmy. I'm going now. Oh, I'm going to go. I'm leaving you. Bye-bye then. Children don't know the difference between reality and imagination. Reality, yeah, they don't know the difference. People think, oh, they know you're just pretending. No, they don't. Children don't know the difference. So when you are saying this to a child, or maybe you experience this, I experienced this a lot. My parents would walk off and pretend to leave me if I wasn't listening or following their instructions. Maybe we were out and about. And so children will internalize as, mummy and daddy are leaving me. I must be something wrong with me. What am I doing wrong? They see their environment as threatening because the parents are doing this. And when I say threatening, puts that state of anxiety, that survival mechanism kicks in, because the child, in order to feel safe, is to be with the parents and to not feel abandoned. And also sleep training can cause this when babies are young. That separation, because the baby doesn't know what you're doing, it feels abandoned. The baby is just feeling abandoned and left and crying out because all it wants to do is survive, feel that connection and that love in order to survive. And the reason why they just stop crying is because they know nobody is actually coming. It's not because they've learned to go to sleep. But anyway, some of those may sound familiar, and those are just some of the ways that the abandonment wound can be created. But also, abandonment doesn't have to be physical. Emotional abandonment really does play an important role. Your parents can be physically present, but if they don't show you any validation, any love, you're out of touch with their own emotions, this means you could have been emotionally abandoned. That they didn't know how to be with their own emotions, so they were never able to be with your emotions, never able to show you that love that you needed in order to thrive in childhood. So that is the emotional abandonment wound. When children begin to internalize that and hold on to that belief, we end up forming this abandonment wound. And we are designed, like I said, to have those connections, to have those close relationships. But when we have held on to this abandonment wound, we fear people getting close. We fear people leaving when we're in close relationships. And so what happens, all those feelings associated with the abandonment kind of get stuffed down. And that person that craves that connection that natural instinct to be close with somebody gets stuffed down and suppressed into the shadow also. And so we forget about that person. We deny that part of ourselves because it hurts to be close, because we fear the abandonment. And so we are letting the emotional, that aspect of ourselves that is so used to being abandoned, take the driver's seat in the relationships. And saying, hold on a minute, this doesn't feel safe because that person is getting too close. So we self-sabotage in relationships. It can even create codependency because we do fear them leaving. So maybe you become overly attached, very needy and clingy. But part of this healing is actually allowing that side of us that craves that connection, that you desire that deep and meaningful relationship, to actually take the driver's seat. And so then you can heal from that abandonment wound. And the way we do this is allowing those feelings to come up, any shame, any guilt that we've held on to from that abandonment wound, even though it was never our fault. We internalize that and we associate some negative emotion with that. And so when we are triggered, we are feeling that emotion again, and we don't want to feel that. So then we react either with complete sadness or with rage. So this means we have to allow ourselves to feel that emotion that we felt when we were abandoned, because we don't want to feel that. We weren't able to process that. And when you're a child, you're not able to understand adult concepts of why mummy and daddy divorced, why daddy or why mummy wasn't on the scene. And for me personally, my father stopped being present in my life from around the age of 10. My mum and dad divorced when I was at 6 or 7, 8. It was a very messy divorce, and my dad was a drug addict. He became very heavily involved in drugs, and I only saw him a handful of times from that time of that age when my mum and dad divorced. So he was not present in my life at all. And so this created that abandonment wound. And whenever I thought about him, I would get very emotional. I would worry about him. I was always feeling like there was this weight on my shoulder. And when he passed away, the weight was completely lifted. I know that kind of sounds selfish, that oh, when your parents died, you're supposed to be really sad and upset, but it felt like this huge release, this burden that was no longer there, that I didn't have to worry about his well-being, because I would always worry he died. And when he did die, I didn't realize the huge release and relief I would feel when that happened. But even now, I am still healing from my own abandonment wound, because it's not just my father, it's also my mother. My mother was very neglectful. She was very emotional, abusive, and she would emotionally abandon us. We had no validation when I was growing up. And what has really helped me on healing my abandonment wound is actually showing up for myself. Because often when we feel abandoned, we are actually abandoning ourselves, because we're always showing up for other people because we fear that they might leave. So then we are showing up playing, please don't leave me, please don't leave me, please don't leave me. And you do everything to meet their needs, to keep them happy. So then it goes back to the fact that you were abandoning yourself. And so on my healing journey, I've been able to become aware of ways that I was abandoning myself. And then I can begin to show up for myself and realize that it was never actually anything I've done. So the things we can do today to heal that abandonment wound is actually going within and sitting with ourselves. So then we're not abandoning ourselves. So this means actually going into our shadow, discovering what is in the shadow, discovering that side of yourself that seeks that actual connection and that love with somebody. Because if you fear somebody might leave because of your abandonment wound, that part of you that seeks the connection and that love is residing in your shadow, because you've associated it with something bad like shame and guilt. So it's time to bring out into the light those parts of us that are no longer shameful, because there's no need to be ashamed of wanting love and connection and feel that emotional connection, that emotional intimacy with somebody. And if you want to take this further and go into self-abandonment, check out this video next with 10 steps or ways that you are actually self-abandoning. So with that being said, I will see you in this video. Much love.